Welcome everyone to today's public briefing for the South American Subbasin. My name is Atlee Keller. I'm filling in for my colleague Lisa Butler, but I have previously worked in the South American Subbasin, so I recognize a lot of your names, and it's great to see you all here today. We'll go over our agenda for the day. So we'll start with some words from Perrette in just a moment. And then we will discuss the periodic evaluations and GSP 2027 task review, have a presentation on that before opening it up to questions. And then we have a few final engagement reminders, and we'll end this meeting by 11. So with that, I think I can hand it over, to Perrette.
Thank you, Atlee. Good morning, everyone. Perrette Harmon, Executive Director at Sacramento Central Groundwater Authority. Relatively new here, so great to have this good attendance. And I'm going to turn over to Brian here shortly. Brian Thorson works for GEI Consultants, and GEI Consultants, along with a couple of sub consultants, is the technical arm for SCGA, and SCGA is a plan manager for this subbasin SASb. So I know you probably are familiar. There's lots of acronyms, and especially with Sigma, that is now 11 years old, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We adopted a lot of acronyms. So I've asked Brian to make sure that we speak this language, but we don't assume all of you who are joining us today do. So if there's something that slips through and it feels like a foreign language, maybe you can drop in the chat and we'll make sure we bring you along. But what Sigma essentially did is that all of the subbasins that are in medium, high, or great low overdrafted condition in the state of California, they had to form an agency first, designate an agency to manage basins or subbasins, and then the first order of action was to develop a plan, and it had to be done by 2020 or 2022. And then we were given 20 years. All of the basins were given 20 agencies and basins were given 20 years to achieve sustainability, another 30 to maintain that sustainability. So we have 50 years. So we have spent 5 years already of that. So 4 years left. But DWR set up a structure that they were not leaving us to do, just give us 20 years and at the end of that, see how things went. So every 5 years is a milestone, and we are at that 5-year mark that we need to be doing a periodic evaluation of our plan, looking at where we are, how things are going, groundwater conditions, and if there's any projects or management actions, how those are moving along. We are setting up, so this is a kickoff meeting for us to get this going, this action, this activity, and GI Consultants is doing that for us. They also are responsible for doing annual reports. Those are more of a report cards every year. So Brian is going to briefly touch upon that too. But the big task in front of us for this subbasin is get the periodic evaluation submitted to DWR by January of next year, 2027. So actually a year after that. But so I think that's with that. Welcome again, everyone. And Atlee and Brian, I think we decided we take questions at the end, maybe, unless there's something that you completely lost and maybe raise your hand or put a comment in the chat. So Brian, turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Perrette. I'm going to share my screen and walk through this presentation. Let's see. Okay, it says I'm screen sharing. Can people see my screen?
We can see it, Brian.
Okay.
Not full screen yet.
Yeah, do you want me to try to go full screen? Sometimes that I've seen that go weird, so I tried to make it as big as I can without
That
that danger.
I do think that works as it is right now.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing I want to say is Brett mentioned that GI is responsible for the periodic evaluation and the annual report. That's true, but I want to acknowledge that we're also working with Larry Walker and Associates and also working with Woodard and Kern on both the periodic evaluation and the annual report. So those two consulting firms are helping us um, work on this report. So with that, I'm just going to jump in and somebody's on the teams, it looks like, again. So I'm really going to just talk about three things. I'm going to talk first about the requirements for the GSP 2027 periodic evaluation, and then I'm going to go through each task. I've got basically a slide for each task where I'm going to describe what we intend to do as part of the periodic evaluation. And then the third, I'm going to talk about the South American Subbasin status as part of as a foundation for the periodic evaluation. We're looking at the annual reports, and we're working on the annual report for water year 2025 right now, and a lot of that's going to feed into the periodic evaluation. So we're using those annual reports and this annual report to be as efficient as we can in developing the GSP 2027 periodic evaluation. So in terms of requirements for that periodic evaluation, I think Perrette mentioned it's required every 5 years. So every 5 years, you're required to do a periodic evaluation. Ours is due June 27th, 2027. That's a date from the DWR's determination letter that they gave us when they approved the South American Subbasin GSP. So we're supposed to report new information, look at groundwater conditions relative to sustainable management criteria, look at the status of projects and management actions, and then look at the basin setting. Are there changes because of this new information? So, I mean, the groundwater conditions relative to sustainable management criteria and the status of projects and management actions is reported in each annual report. So as part of the GSP 2027 periodic evaluation, we look at where we are at right now, but also how we've advanced and how those conditions have changed over that 5-year period. I want to step back a little bit and talk about a process for revising or amending the GSP. The process is that there's a periodic evaluation, and from that periodic evaluation, we identify a list of changes or updates or revisions, things that are the new information that helps support the GSP. And then we evaluate those changes against the DWR Sigma criteria, and then we determine whether or not, or the GSAs make the determination whether or not we need to have an amendment. And an amendment would need to be adopted by all the GSAs in the subbasin. Now, if you don't have to do an amendment, the regulations say you don't have to do anything. But what we've had a lot of internal talk about, if we've got new information, even if it's not significant enough to require a GSP, we want that in one place where the public and us can grab the most recent GSP and have everything there in one package. So we're proposing that we would have a revision even if the GSAs determine that an amendment was not made. So that's the path we're on. So when we look at the evaluation tasks, there's 10 tasks. We've got project management, of course, but then we've got to update the hydrogeologic conceptual model, develop and summarize new information, describe Cassano model updates. What has changed in the Cassano model since the model we used in 2022 or 2021 really to develop the GSP, which was submitted in 2022. We're going to identify Kasana model scenarios that we need to do over the next 5 years to respond to the integrated surface water criteria that DWR will be issuing guidelines for sometime next year. We need to assess the monitoring networks. Is our monitoring network performing adequately? Is it covering, providing us the information we'd like to have? We want to evaluate sustainable management criteria. The criteria seem to be appropriate? Is there any reason for any changes in the criteria? Provide status of projects and management actions. Are we on schedule with projects and management actions? Are there new projects and management actions? Is there a reason a project and management action isn't appropriate anymore? And then task 9 is the big one, prepare the periodic evaluation report, which needs to be submitted to the Department of Water Resources by January 27th, 2027. And then prepare we're going to prepare a version of the GSP that has this new information in it. The question is it going to be a revision or an amendment? And that, again, is for the GSAs to determine. And then today we're going to conduct outreach and engagement and just coordination with the other GSAs or other subbasins around us, excuse me. So just a quick note on the right side here, I've got a figure from the GSP that just reminds us that with the projects that we have, the main projects, the regional conjunctive use / water bank, the harvest water, and OHWD's recharge projects, the GSP showed, and these projects are on schedule and working forward, that the GSP showed that with these projects, why we had improvements in groundwater levels and established that the South American subbasin would be sustainable when these projects are complete. Now, all these projects are in process and aren't complete yet, but they are on schedule. So just a quick look at budget and schedule. We've got the 10 tasks there. The key thing is we have draft evaluation report and amendment and revision or amendment by the end of June 2026. So that gives time before they're due January 2027 for to go through whatever process we need. For example, if it's an amendment, each GSA board would have to adopt that. So outreach and engagement, we've got this launch in the middle of December, and we're also looking at having another meeting coming back in around March, sometime in the middle, and then having a meeting June where we present the complete results. So I'm going to just step through the tasks now with that background. So the hydrogeologic conceptual model is task 2. The main new information we have in that is the airborne electromagnetic AEM survey data. That covers part of the South American subbasin. That survey, they didn't fly over certain urban areas, so it doesn't cover the South American subbasin as extensively as it does for some subbasins. But we're basically putting together a plan to update that HCM is the easy way to say it, hydrogeologic conceptual model. And we're looking at completed, we've got draft sections for the periodic evaluation and a draft section that would go into the GSP that describes the AEM survey data available and how that relates to the hydro HCM. So we've been working on task 2. Task 3 is to develop and summarize new information. We've also been working on that. This is just a list of some of the new information. I mentioned the AEM survey. DWR has published aquifer recharge potential maps that will help us look at where we might be able to do recharge within the subbasin and provide some information to support the projects. There's the SB 5 2022 domestic well vulnerability that DWR is working on pilot projects with different subbasins, and there's a pilot project in South American subbasin where they're looking at the vulnerability of domestic wells. There's new information there. The American River Watershed Resilience Pilot Project should be wrapping up in the next couple months. That's new information from that. We have the Domestic Well Advisory Group as a voluntary monitoring program that has provided some information on well levels, groundwater levels in domestic wells. We've completed a domestic well inventory that identified that there were more domestic wells in the subbasin than are listed in the GSP, so we'll add that and update that section in the GSP. And later on in one of the tasks, I'll show, we'll be doing the updating the vulnerability analysis for that. DWR has issued a number of BMPs and guidance documents that we're aware of and will guide this process. The American River Basin study came out just after the GSP was released, so there's new information there that's not in the GSP. We've reached out to the Aerojet Superfund site to get more information about water quality there and some of their pumping capture zones. And then there's just 5 years of additional information of groundwater level, water quality, subsidence, land use. So there's a lot of information out there that will feed into this. So for task 4 and 5 regarding the Kasana model, we're going to look at the updates since the last GSP adoption, and they do updates for annual report to get us the water budget that goes into the annual report, and then they've been updates to support some of the ongoing projects such as Harvest Water and the Water Bank or the conjunctive use. And then for the model scenarios, we were going to develop a plan for the interconnected surface water analysis, as I mentioned, to summarize and update the identification of those reaches, and then recommend future modeling needs after the guidance comes out and we're able to evaluate that. So task 6, assessing the monitoring networks. We're going to review the available information used to establish the monitoring network and the GSP as a foundation, add additional new information. We know there's 2 wells that were destroyed, so we're going to review their location to determine if there's a replacement necessary to maintain our coverage. We're going to evaluate the network for spatial and temporal gaps to determine if we need additional monitoring wells, and then review sources for potential new monitoring wells. There's new wells in the DWR well completion database, and then there's the Community Groundwater Monitoring Pilot Program that has 3 levels of participants. We had a short conversation with DWR to learn more about that a couple days ago. Perrette and I did, and for sure, level C participants would be our potential new wells that we can add to the program. We need to see where they are and what information is there, and level B also could provide some information that would be helpful from that program. So we'll be looking at that. And then Harvest Water is also has installed some groundwater level monitoring wells and is installing some more. So we've initiated a conversation with them about those wells, and those are other potential wells that that will feed into this task. And evaluating the sustainability management criteria. Why we want to evaluate the groundwater level minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and interim targets based on the 5 years of data we have. Are they still appropriate? Is there a reason that any of them might need to be changed or updated? In the GSP, it mentions 8 to 10 wells in the Harvest Water area that were fairly new, that we might want to look at those once we get more data. So we'll look at that to see if that new data provides any information about whether or not we should move the minimum thresholds. And then we're going to evaluate the water quality minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, and interim targets. And in this task, we're also going to respond to DWR gave us 4 corrective actions in the determination letter. So the first corrective action was related to water quality. They suggested we consider establishing an SMC for arsenic. So we'll look at arsenic and make that decision in coordination with the GSAs. And they wanted to provide information on water quality using specific conductivity, and then amend the undesirable results slightly to account for localized threshold exceedances in a single aquifer zone. So we'll look at all that under task 7. Another thing we're going to look at under task 7, we've noticed, and I'll point it out again, I've got a map later in the presentation showing the wells that have been below. We've had a few wells, 2, 3, 4 wells below minimum thresholds, and generally they've been around the Aerojet Superfund site. So we're going to evaluate that and see if it coordinate with Aerojet in that area and see if it makes sense to maybe lower those a little bit, because they're, first off, we can't, I mean, the Superfund site, they're managing it. We can't dictate how to manage it, and that they're doing pumping to prevent those plumes of contaminants from spreading, which is something we definitely want because we're supporting water quality in the subbasin also. So well vulnerability analysis will be part of task 8. So we're looking at using DWR's tools for that. They have a domestic well susceptibility tool. They're reporting dry wells. You can look at the domestic well susceptibility tool and summarize some of the activities with the Domestic Well Advisory Group, the Volunteer Monitoring Program, and the new pilot community groundwater monitoring program that people are working on with DWR. All of those are information that we can put into this vulnerability analysis. And I mean, the vulnerability analysis will cover domestic wells in the entire subbasin. So we'll be looking at, every wells, doesn't matter which GSA they're in, we will leave this analysis will cover the whole subbasin. Project and management actions. So that vulnerability analysis is part of the task looking at the project and management actions. We had 3 groups of projects in the GSP. We have existing projects that are completed or ongoing. We're going to focus on the group 2, the near-term plan projects that are on schedule. That's Harvest Water, the OHWD groundwater recharge project and groundwater monitoring project, and the regional conjunctive use / water bank program. We have a group 3, the main supplemental projects. The main project there is the SAFCA flood managed aquifer recharge, where they're looking at potentially being able to get some water for managed aquifer recharge into the subbasin. So a couple potential new projects that have come up that we're talking about and will continue up is Elk Grove at the SCGA meeting presented a recharge basin, a potential project that would be a recharge basin supplied by the Folsom South Canal. And then there's also the Cosumnes River Watershed Multi-Benefit Project that has that's a potential project in the subbasin. And then if the other projects that we'd be interested in considering. So then to prepare the evaluation report, we're going to add relevant new information, address all 4 of the DWR recommended corrective actions, assess the monitoring networks. So basically the results of the tasks are going to go into the evaluation report, which is going to be a fairly short report, probably around 50 pages. That's been a typical size of the ones that have been completed in the critically overdrafted basin, and the periodic evaluation is meant to be a brief evaluation of the report. of the status of the GSP, excuse me. Sorry, my throat seems to be getting a little dry. So then outreach, engagement, and coordination. We've got the South American Subbasin Executive Committee meetings. We had a meeting back in October. There's a meeting scheduled in, I think it's February 23rd. I didn't get the full date here, but I think it'll be on, somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, or we'll have it up again. And then there's 3 dedicated public meetings. Okay, we got the meeting today. We'll have another meeting in mid-March. We haven't picked a date yet, and we'll have a meeting in June. So, okay, there's an RCA that it's recommended corrective actions. So again, I've just listed the corrective actions here that we're gonna, under various tasks, we're gonna address those as part of this work, so that we've covered that. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the South American Subbasin kind of assessment based on the annual reports 2021 through 2024 are complete and available on the DWR Sigma portal or the local South American Subbasin website. And we're working on water year 2025. So basically in these reports, we've not had any undesirable results. Groundwater levels looking at groundwater levels, groundwater storage, groundwater quality, and subsidence, no undesirable results have occurred in the South American Subbasin during this time period. I'm also going to look a little bit at domestic wells, the water balance, and projects and management actions. So if we look at the undesirable results, the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, SMC or sustainable management criteria, the undesirable result would be greater than 25% of the representative monitoring point wells being below MTs for 3 consecutive years. We have not had a single RMP below MTs for 3 consecutive years to this point. So that undesirable result has not happened. Reduction of groundwater storage follows the groundwater levels, so no quality there. And with looking at degraded groundwater quality, this is going to be modified just a little bit per the DWR corrective action, but even with the corrective action they've recommended, we have not had any undesirable results. And then land subsidence, we've not seen any land subsidence outside of in the subbasin. So here's the maps that I mentioned earlier. I've got the 2024 fall groundwater levels and the 2025 groundwater levels. And on the map, you could see the green circles are the monitoring wells that are above the measurable objective. Then we've got the tan or gold, I guess, are between the MO and the MT, or between the measurable objective and the MT. So they're below the measurable objective, but they're still above the MT. And then the red are below the MT. So you see, we had in 2024 we had 3 below the MT. In 2025 we've got 4 below the MT. We've got 27 of the 43 wells. We see the 2 destroyed wells up here that we have measurements at. 27 were above the measurable objective, so more than half. And we only had 4 below the MT. And you can see where the Aerojet area, and then there's another area by Mather Air Force Base that's of concern. Okay. So then looking at domestic wells, dry wells reported in the last 5 years, why there was one dry well here in this part of the subbasin reported in August of 2022 during the drought. So that's a single dry well across the last 5 years at that location. And then this is their susceptibility tool, which looks 5 years ahead based on trends. And there's 3 sections. They do this by section. So within that section, based on the groundwater levels that we have reported so far, why they estimate what these wells would be. And looks like 350 here. So yeah, so there looks like 5 potential well. Well, no, it's 1 well here, excuse me, and 2 wells here. So I guess we got 3 wells that it predicts might be susceptible to going dry. And then just looking at the water balance, I think there's a lot of information on here, how much groundwater pumping, deep percolation, stream seepage, recharge. I think for me, the key line is the storage, which is the cumulative change in storage, which is the black line. So it goes up when we've got a wet year and it comes down when we've got a dry years. And as you can see, it's kind of went up and down since 1995. So you can identify 2017, it went way up, and over the 2013 through 2016, it dropped. Dropped again in 2022, and now we're back up through 2024. This will be updated as part of the water year 2025 report. So I don't know if I call these preliminary findings based on the 4 annual reports and the very preliminary work we've done on water year 2025. I guess we've had no undesirable results. There's only 1 dry well reported over the 5-year period. Susceptibility tool predicts 3 dry wells in the next 5 years. Our projects are on schedule. We're going to include a response to the DWR recommended corrective actions. The GSAs will determine if any amendment is required after we complete the draft periodic evaluation report. And then we'll have a document that's either a revision to the GSP that includes this new information and the changes that DWR asked us to do per the corrective actions, or we'll have an amendment depending on what the GSAs describe. And with that, I think I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Brian. We do have a few questions in the chat. First, since it's most recent, Lon asked where the 3 wells are expected to be located.
The
3 dry wells that are anticipated.
Oh, so I say anticipated. I don't expect any dry wells, to be honest, but they're saying there's a chance, right? This is a future prediction in these sections, someplace in that section. So if you can see my screen where my cursor is, it would be in that section or in this section down here. Is where their tool predicted. Mm-hmm. So, and we'll can update this tool. Well, I think they're updating it about annually, so I'll have to. Not sure when that next update is due, but if I recall correctly, the DWR updates it annually.
Thanks. And I know Barbara asked a question early on about. I said, I would like to hear how the monitoring networks will be assessed. What are the criteria and standards to determine adequacy?
So we're going to base that on the DWR best management practices document. In the DWR best management practice document, why they reference a publication that talks about, depending on amount of pumping in a subbasin, how many wells you need, and how much area those wells can cover. So that is kind of is what it was based on in the GSP, and we'll continue to base it on the same method for the future. But we'll look a little closer at various areas based on the numbers of domestic wells and the number of, and what our levels are showing right now in those areas, and consider whether it makes sense to add additional wells there. Also, based on that, why there's a map in the GSP that shows this. Um, our current network covers 92% of the basin based on the criteria. And what we'd like to do is figure out a way to cover more of the basin. It might be hard to find an appropriate well in exactly the right location to get 100% coverage, but we're going to look for wells to increase that so we get closer to 100% coverage.
And I just put in the chat a link to all of the best management practices, including the monitoring network, BMP. Amelia, I see you have your hand raised. You are muted if you're talking to us. Okay, we'll give it a second. You can also type your question in the chat. George is asking a follow-up to the question about the 3 susceptible well potential, saying, would those be old wells? Do you know the depth of those 3 wells? And is the susceptibility due to depth?
So those are all good questions, and mostly I'm going to say I don't know. But this is the way DWR reports that result. I don't know, but I don't know whether or not we could get a well from them. I'm thinking they probably aren't going to identify specific wells with respect to that. We might be able to get an idea of the depth from them if we reach out to them, but we'd have to reach out to them right now. It's not available directly.
Any other questions here? Okay, let's try Amelia again.
Hi, sorry, my Zoom crashed at just the wrong time. Yeah, so I have some questions about the domestic wells. So I guess my first comment is that DWR well susceptibility tool presumably uses the well completion report database as its understanding of where the domestic wells are.
Yes.
And that database is, as I'm sure you're aware, woefully inadequate in some parts of the subbasin. So I am curious what you've done to determine the number of domestic wells in the basin, because that's supposed to be updated, right?
Yeah, so we did a domestic well inventory about a few years back, and when I say, so for that inventory, why we collected all the information that we had available about domestic wells, and then we also noticed online that there's a UC Berkeley did a study with the Water Community Center where they identified likely sections where there was likely to be domestic wells, and also where there was probably domestic wells, and they also supported where those wells suggested how many wells might be in various sections. So basically using that, why we've updated where we think wells might be. And then, of course, there's public water suppliers that supply a big part of the subbasin too. So we've looked at domestic wells with that mind. We have a little bit of additional information in terms of depth from the voluntary monitoring program. But other than that, if you have a source of information on domestic wells that other than the DWR well completion survey or those, we'd certainly be interested in talking about it.
No, I don't have information on how many wells, aside from I know, I live in the rural area and there are over 1,000 homes. And in my neighborhood, only 5 to 25% of those were in the database, so the vast majority were not. And
Right.
so at some point I thought there was talk about using, like a address. Essentially, if there's a house and they're not hooked up to a municipal system, then they must have a well. So,
Yeah, so that's essentially what these data sources are doing, and they're looking at whether, at that. So I think, and I don't recall the exact numbers, but there was significantly more wells that were identified as a result of this. So, I whether or not we got every single well, I'm not sure, but there's more wells, based on the results of that study than we had in the GSP. So I
okay.
mean,
I'll look at the updated, or I guess once the periodic evaluation is done. And then if I can just ask one last question, so thinking about the DWR community monitoring program that they're setting up, is there a reason to exclude the level B participants where homeowners would be taking their own measurements using DWR equipment?
not necessarily. I don't think that there's a reason to exclude. In fact, we're planning to consider those. I think the one reason about the level B is they don't necessarily report the depth or a screening interval to us, and it's more useful if we have a depth and screening interval, which we will have from the level C.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. It looks like Dominic from DWR is also responding regarding the groundwater condition, this water susceptibility tool. Dominic, I'm curious, is there anything that you want to add to that or verbalize? If folks have questions about that, is there somewhere that they can go to? You can also type in the chat. In the meantime,
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I forgot I had to hit star 6 because I'm connected to my phone. Yeah, so I'll put my email in the chat and people can send me specific questions and I can follow up with them. I mean, it's definitely a forecasting tool. I didn't work on it. My colleagues did, so I don't know the specifics. I was just looking at the data on our open data platform. So it looks like one of the things it does include is those well completion reports, which, as was pointed out, are incomplete. But I would assume that when they did this analysis, they also would have put in some type of, accounting for the fact that there are domestic wells that we don't have in our database. And I know when we do other work, we do kind of similar to what was referenced, which is we know we have the boundaries of water districts. And so we kind of, and we also have all the data from the water boards, so we can infer where people are using well water. So I'm assuming it incorporates that. But yeah, I'll put my email and people can send me questions and I'll follow up with the people who actually worked on this to get their questions answered.
Much appreciated. Shoaib, if I'm saying that right, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. Similar to questions that Amelia brought up about the domestic well inventories, right? Brian, over I guess about 3-4 years ago, there was a significant amount of resources or questions about the inventory that was used or the number of domestic wells that were part of the original GSP plan, right? and it seemed inadequate. So there were discussions of working with the county to figure out the um, number of wells or number of parcels, mostly, more than 2 acres, 2 acre lots that are not connected to any water service, right, through Sac County Water Agency or Elgor Water District or any other water purveyor. So those parcels, if they don't have a connected water service, they must be on a domestic well. And using some sort of a zoning map or like parcel information to get an inventory of those parcels and have a complete list. The domestic well advisory group, that's how actually the domestic well advisory group came to be as a result of those things, those information missing from the GSP. So I think it's very critical. It's a really important part of this update that we get this right this time. I encourage you to work with the Domestic Well Advisory Group, Sacramento County. I think Chris Hunley is a great resource as well. He has some history as well. And yeah, I think we should strive to have a more complete inventory this round. Thank you.
I see Suzanne's hand.
So just to, with respect to the previous comment, the zoning, I obtained zoning maps from the city of Elk Grove, and I actually counted. You actually can see the parcels on the map. So it's, rather rudimentary, but, you do get a count of the number of parcels that would be on a domestic well. And also, the tax rolls show the assessments that are being paid to the various GSAs. And those could be looked at. I have a list of the, I have the tax roll for the district, and I'm able to look at those people that are on domestic wells. So, I mean, there are public resources that we could look at to get a, pretty close idea.
Chris?
Hi, Atlee. Just real quick, Sharab, thanks for bringing up just sort of the deeper dive on the well data. As everyone on this call is very, very well aware, the existing databases, they're as good as the data that was provided to them. And so in many cases, there was a map that had, a big X that said there's a well here on 0 Sheldon Road. Perhaps there wasn't an address. And so some of that detailed articulation of where the wells are at, which section, township, range, all of that good stuff. There's some noise in the background. Good news is one of our neighboring partners in the North American Subbasin, Reina Villaseñor, she spent a great deal of time, I want to say it was about a year, possibly 2 years ago, and she has a very systematic way of sort of threading the needle on the various databases that are available. Some of the points that Suzanne just brought up as well, all of that data, looking at the parcels, lots of research, lots of time, but there is a way to get to that finer fidelity of where those wells are located. It's not 100% perfect, of course, but certainly we can get better data, and happy to help on that effort.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions?
Actually, this is Kirat Harman. We did receive 2 in advance, and I believe the first one was covered. So the first question was, how will DWR domestic well monitoring pilot study open data factor into the SASb GSP 5-year periodic evaluation? We did cover that we are working. We had a call, Brian and I, with DWR. Definitely the level C is very appropriate to bring in. We do need to look at where those wells are and do we have already data points there, or is it an area that we have data gaps? So there's a little bit of that kind of checking, evaluating. We also checked with DWR if the door is closed at the moment. They said they would like to have, I think they have 9, Brian, right?
That's right.
They have received 9 participants in different levels, maybe 3 or 4 in level C. And they would like to, they've done the QA, QC, they're going to be doing something else internally. So we still have a couple of weeks. If any of the people on the call are interested in participating in that pilot study, I think you still can. And if we have a Dominic, or I think we had the link there that directs people to how they can apply or show interest. But then mid-January, they kind of need to say it's done for this time. There may be another open window where we collect. But what we were interested in, Brian and I, we talked to them, is once we identify where we have the data gaps, can it be more targeted to those areas to see if anyone from landowners or well owners would be willing to participate. So we are bringing that in. But the second question, Brian, I think you have them too. Is that something that we covered? So it's a question about OHWD and SCGA, how the domestic wells, will the data from domestic wells in the OHWD GSA be evaluated with data from the domestic wells in the SCGA GSA management area?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. I think we're going to evaluate domestic wells across the entire subbasin, not just in one single area, and use the same methods. So.
Okay, good.
If I understood that correctly, if I understood the question correctly.
Yeah, so I think that's my read on that too, that we do bring that data in and incorporate into the 5-year PE.
Absolutely.
Great. And I just put in the chat, this is from the most recent newsletter about how you would contact DWR for participating in that domestic well program. All right.
I see there is one more question maybe, Atlee, from George.
Yes.
Are wells drilled for non-potable uses recorded as wells for domestic use? Folks are drilling wells for landscape purposes. Do you know, Brian, if we distinguish between what is considered domestic use, or is it just?
Well, I think it depends on what they put in the DWR database, and whether or not they've identified that as being for landscape versus domestic. I don't recall off the top of my head what their exact categories are. So
Maybe we can look into that and provide that information in future.
Sure.
Amelia, go ahead.
All right, thanks. Yeah, sorry, one last question. I'm just thinking about those wells near Aerojet where they've been consistently below the minimum threshold, and it sounds like you're looking at changing that minimum threshold. Is there protection for if those are domestic wells and they are at risk of, going dry? I recognize that maybe under Sigma, and you can't control that area, but is there some sort of mechanism to provide water make sure those people keep having water?
Not that I'm aware of at the moment, but I think that's something that we need to consider as we're doing this evaluation. And I guess that where they are with respect to that location and such, if they're out there, I'd be concerned about their water. Have they checked their water quality depending on where they are? So.
Yeah, I guess I would just hope that we don't just move the bar in order to meet the bar without making sure that people have sustainable water.
Right. And we're not going to move the bar just to meet the bar. But if the management of that area is really set so that the levels are going to be lower, I think it makes sense to consider that.
All right. Thank you,
And
everyone.
George,
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if George is actually online with us, but if you are, Dominic encouraged you to send him an email with a question about the landscape use wells versus domestic use. So if you can grab that email, feel free to contact Dominic.
Great. I know we are just close to at time, so I'm going
There's
to.
one more. Maybe you can read Barbara's, Natalie.
Let's see. I would encourage the consultants to look more closely at the monitoring system than a bulk number analysis. We have specific monitoring needs for interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystems and domestic wells that need to have monitoring that directly relates to their needs. There should be more analysis than just a total number of wells per pump age. Thanks, Barbara.
That's a good point. That came up with when I talked to Brian, that can we be more specific about the information that we need, and can there be win-win or at least an overlap with what people are already doing.
I think we have time for one more comment or question from Chris.
Thanks, Ali. Just real quick, I don't want to lose sight of Amelia's very good question and comment. I think as we're moving into this sort of the evaluation on lowering the SMCs, or the minimum thresholds rather, for specific areas like the aerojet remediation region, there are a handful of domestic wells out there, and her point is very, I think, important, in that there has to be an understanding as we're developing and looking at lowering that threshold. What does that impact look like to domestic well users? And I think all of the folks on the call, we understand that that sort of management area maybe warrants a change, but we have to make sure that, the outreach, the components with talking with folks, looking at the existing well data in that region, it makes sense, and that we're not lowering it to such a degree that, you're taking 5-10% off of the, the water levels in that area and saying, well, it's, if they have 10 feet left in their well, they're good. They get a check mark. And I know that GEI and the team is not doing that, but just being able to articulate a thoughtful approach to why we're doing the justification for that lowering of those groundwater levels, just making sure that's built out.
Thank you, Chris. Well said. That's certainly what we plan to do.
All right. I know we have just 1 minute left, so I'm sharing my screen of future engagement opportunities. Spotlight that. And I see we have a question in the chat about the February 23rd executive committee. That meeting, those are public meetings, and I believe that will be virtual. All of the updates on that, as well as the spring public meeting similar to this, follow up on this, that Brian mentioned, those will be announced via the websites that you see, as well as the email list. So I put those in the chat. So there's the SCGA site, the Subbasin site, and then you can sign up to that email list in order to receive those updates in your email inbox. All right, we're right at time. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we will be in touch. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.